Hi, class. This is this week's installment of Wayside School Gets a Little Stranger by Louis Sekar. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Anyway, we are on chapter 19, and this is just kind of, it's the funniest book. It's just random, anything you can think of off the top of your head for school. So, Chapter 20, Elevators. Mr. Kidswatter's voice came over the loudspeaker. Good morning, boys and girls. There was the usual pause. I have a very important announcement, said Mr. K. Elevators have been installed in Wayside School. For a second, the kids on the 30th floor were too stunned to speak, and then everyone went crazy. Yahoo! Yelled Sherry. Hot diggity! Shouted Damien. Everyone was yelling and jumping. Zippity-doo-dah! Shouted Mrs. Drizzle. Cheers could be heard coming from every classroom in Wayside School. The higher the classroom, the louder the cheers. Now, before you all rush out and use the elevators, said Mr. Kidswatter, I want to talk a little bit about elevator safety. I knew there was going to be something. I don't want the same kind of chaos that we have on the stairs every day. I don't know how many times I have to tell you, when you go up the stairs, stay to the right. When you come down the stairs, stay to the left. But still, everyone keeps bumping into each other. Okay, so you get it, right? If you stay to the right, you have to go like this way. But if you're coming down and you have to stay to the left, you would be in the same path of the people going up to the right. Just in case you didn't get that. Well, that won't happen on the elevators. I have personally designed a special safety system. There are 2 elevators. One is blue, one is red. When you want to go up, you take the blue elevator. When you want to go down, you take the red elevator. It's that simple. It can't go wrong. The blue one only goes up. The red one only goes down. Think about that for a minute. By the way, has anyone seen my coffee pot? And so, at last, Wayside School got elevators. A blue one and a red one. They each worked perfectly one time, and they never could be used again. Chapter 21. Open wide. The good news, Jason got to leave school early. The bad news, he had a dentist appointment. I'll never eat candy again, he promised the tooth god as he headed down the stairs. And I'll brush my teeth after every meal, I promise. Even if it's just a snack. I'll bring my toothbrush to school. Just please, please don't let it find any cavities. I've heard that song before, answered a voice inside of his head. Every time you go to the dentist, it's the same thing. But then, a week later, you're eating candy and forgetting to brush your teeth. This time I really, really, really mean it, Jason promised. Too late, said the voice. An hour later, Jason was lying on his back in the dentist chair. Open, said the dentist. You know what his dentist's name was? Dr. Payne. That's not a good sign. His dentist was named Dr. Payne. She had long fingers and even longer fingernails. Jason opened his big mouth. He had the second biggest mouth in his whole class. Wider, said Dr. Payne. Jason stretched his mouth open until his cheeks hurt. That's good, said Dr. Payne. Now just a little bit wider. The veins in Jason's neck bulged out as he stretched his mouth even wider. His eyes watered. His throat was dry. Okay, just hold it like that, said Dr. Payne, and she turned on the sucking machine and put a tube in Jason's mouth. The machine made a gagging noise as it sucked out every last drop of moisture. And as Dr. Payne poked around at his teeth, she said, "Tch, tch, tch," and "oh my" several times. "So how do you like school?" she asked. "Ah," said Jason. "What grade are you in?" said Jason. "Well, just remember," said Dr. Payne, "it's very important to always listen to your teachers and do whatever they say." She poked a tooth with a long pointed dentist tool. "Ah!" Jason screamed in agony. "Did that hurt?" asked Dr. Payne. Jason shook his head. If he told her it hurt, she might think it was a cavity. If she couldn't find it herself, he certainly wasn't going to tell her about it. "Are you sure?" asked Dr. Payne. She poked the same spot. This time, Jason didn't even make a sound. Tears and sweat dripped down his face. The receptionist came into the room. "Yes?" asked Dr. Payne. Jason was glad for the break. "Kendall's mother is on the phone," said the receptionist. "She refuses to pay her bill." "What?" exclaimed Dr. Payne. "How dare!" "She said you pulled the wrong tooth." "Give me the phone," shouted Dr. Payne, and the receptionist handed it to her. "This is Dr. Payne. What do you mean you're not paying your bill?" "Well, then, just bring Kendall back in here and I'll pull that one too. I'll pull them all, but you still have to pay me." "Your lawyer? I don't care what your lawyer said. You can tell your lawyer to rub a monkey's tummy. You heard me. Rub a monkey's tummy with your head." And she slammed down the phone. Jason looked at the diploma hanging on the wall. Before his dentist got married, her name was Jane Smith. His big mouth opened wider. Chapter 22. Jane Smith. "I found Jane Smith," Jason told Stephen the next morning when he got to school. "You better tell Dee Dee," said Stephen. They hurried across the playground. A whistle blew. "No running," ordered Mr. Lewis, the professional playground supervisor. "Now I want you to both go back to the edge of the blacktop and walk this time." The boys went back the way they came, and then they came back the way they went. Dee Dee was sitting on a bench. She had been benched by Mr. Lewis for excessive noise-making. "I found Jane Smith," Jason whispered as he walked past her. Dee Dee and Jason entered the classroom together. Mrs. Drizzle was seated behind her desk. As they passed in front of her, Dee Dee stopped and said, "Did you have a nice time at the dentist yesterday, Jason?" "Yes, Dee Dee. It was very nice," said Jason. "I wonder if we have the same dentist," said Dee Dee. "What is your dentist's name?" "Her name is Dr. Payne," said Jason, "but that hasn't always been her name." "It hasn't?" asked Dee Dee. Remember, they're standing right in front of Mrs. Drizzle's desk. "Oh, no. Before she was married, her name was Jane Smith." "Jane Smith?" asked Dee Dee. "Is that spelled Janesmith? "Yes, that's how you spell Jane Smith," said Jason. "But like I said, that's not her name anymore. Her name is Dr. Payne. She works at the dentist's office at 124 Garden Street." Then they took their seats. Late that afternoon, Dr. Payne finished work and walked out of her office. It had been a good day. She had drilled 25 teeth. She made $60 for every tooth she drilled. 25 times $60 is $1,500. Not bad for a day's work. Of course, not all the teeth really had cavities. But how would any of her patients find out? She got into her fancy silver and black sports car and drove away. And on her way out, she sang with the radio. She didn't even notice the old beat-up green station wagon in her rearview mirror. She lived in a mansion next to the lake. There was a stone wall around the house. She pressed a button in her car, and an iron gate opened. The gate closed behind her as she headed up the long, windy driveway. A moment later, the old green station wagon stopped and parked next to the gate. A woman got out, walked around to the back, and opened the tailgate. She pulled out a ladder. She set the ladder up against the wall. Under her arm, she carried an old blue notebook. Dr. Payne's butler handed her a drink. The cook was making dinner. Dr. Payne's dog, cat, and husband were waiting for her in the den. Her dog's name was Brussels. Her cat's name was Sprouts, and she petted them both. Her husband's name was Sham, and she petted him too. "Hi, darling, how was your day?" he asked. "I made $1,500, she said. And they hugged and kissed, and they loved each other, but they loved money even more. And then they had dinner by candlelight as they watched the sun set over the lake. After dinner, they sat on the deck under the stars. Sprouts lay purring on Jane's lap. Brussels sat faithfully by her side. Life was perfect. "I love you, darling," she said, petting Sprouts. "And I love you," said Sham. "I was talking to the cat," said Jane. The butler stepped out onto the deck. "Excuse me, madam, but there's an elderly woman out in the yard." Jane's long fingernails dug into her cat's neck. "I wonder how she got past the gate," said Sham. "I don't know, sir, but she's probably hungry. Perhaps I can give her some leftovers." "No," shouted Jane. "Get rid of her." "Let me have a look," said Sham. He followed the butler back into the house. He returned a moment later. "Darling, you'll never guess who's here. One of your former teachers. Isn't that just the sweetest?" Jane screamed. She jumped to her feet. Sprouts flew off her lap and into the hot tub. "What's wrong?" asked Sham. "You idiot," shouted Jane. "I told you to get rid of her." She kicked her dog out of the way, and then she climbed over the railing and jumped off the deck to the ground, 15 feet below. Mrs. Drizzle came out onto the deck. "You can't get away from me, young lady," she hollered, and Jane hurt her ankle pretty badly when she hit the ground. It was either sprained or broken. She lay on the ground in agony as she looked up at her former teacher. "You have homework to do," said Mrs. Drizzle. Jane's face twisted with pain. "Rub a monkey's tummy," she shouted, and then struggled to her feet. She had a suitcase stashed in the boathouse, just in case this ever happened. She hobbled to it, grabbed it, then limped down to the lake, dragging her suitcase behind her. Mrs. Drizzle hurried down the steps on the side of the deck. Jane groaned as she threw her suitcase into a motorboat, and then she pulled herself aboard and started the engine. "Darling, darling," Sham shouted from the deck. "Darling, come back," as he watched the boat sputter across the water. Mrs. Drizzle climbed into an old rowboat. "I'll find you, Jane Smith," she shouted into the darkness. "You can run, but you cannot hide." Jane's voice echoed back across the black water. "Rub a monkey's tummy with your head." And neither of them were ever seen again. That's the end of chapter 22. Next week, chapter 23. Bye.